I thought I was getting the fairy tale wedding of my dreams. Instead, I discovered that my wedding planner wasn't just organizing one ceremony that summer, she was planning two. And the second bride, well, let's just say she had excellent taste in grooms. I'd love to know which corner of the globe you're watching from. And if this story speaks to you, make sure to subscribe. Tomorrow's video is one you absolutely can't miss. The first red flag should have been how quickly Vanessa Morgan said yes to planning our wedding. Most established wedding planners in Dallas book months, sometimes years in advance. But when I called Morgan Events in March, desperate because our original planner had suddenly relocated to Phoenix, Vanessa immediately cleared her June calendar for us. "Don't worry, Chelsea," she said during our first meeting at her downtown office. "I'll make sure your wedding to Marcus is absolutely perfect. I can already picture it." Something about the way she said Marcus's name made me pause, but I brushed it off. She was probably just being professional, getting familiar with the details. After all, she'd need to coordinate with him too. Marcus Sullivan and I had been together for 3 years. We met at a corporate mixer where his tech startup was presenting to potential investors for my marketing firm. He was confident without being arrogant, funny without trying too hard, and had this way of making everyone in the room feel like they were the most interesting person there. When he asked me to dinner that night, I said yes before he even finished the question. Our engagement happened on a hiking trail in Colorado last fall. Nothing elaborate, just Marcus, me, and a ring he'd been carrying in his backpack for 2 months, waiting for the right moment. He later admitted he'd been terrified I'd say no, which was ridiculous. I'd been dropping hints about marriage for months, not so subtly forwarding him Instagram posts of engagement rings and wedding venues. Which is why I was so excited to finally plan our dream wedding. We'd saved for 2 years, and with both our families contributing, we had a decent budget for a celebration at the Rosewood Mansion on Turtle Creek. It was going to be elegant, but not stuffy, with a garden ceremony and reception in their ballroom overlooking the city. Vanessa seemed to understand our vision perfectly. During our second meeting, she arrived with a portfolio of ideas that looked like she'd been planning our wedding for months. The color palette was exactly what I'd described: dusty rose and sage green with gold accents. The floral arrangements were sophisticated but romantic. Even the menu suggestions matched our preferences perfectly. "How did you know I wanted peonies?" I asked, flipping through the mock-ups. "Lucky guess," she smiled. "I have a good instinct for these things." Marcus was traveling for work that week, so I handled most of the initial planning myself. Vanessa and I met 3 times over 2 weeks, finalizing vendors, tasting cakes, and discussing every detail from the processional music to the signature cocktails. She was incredibly thorough, taking notes on everything and asking questions I hadn't even thought of. "What's Marcus's favorite song?" she asked during one of our sessions. "The Way You Look Tonight" by Frank Sinatra, I replied. "He's old-fashioned like that." She wrote it down carefully. "Perfect for the first dance." "Actually, we were thinking At Last by Etta James." "Oh." She looked up from her notebook. "But you just said his favorite song was..." "His favorite song and our first dance song are different things," I explained. "We danced to At Last the night we got engaged." She nodded and made the correction, but I noticed she didn't erase the first note. When Marcus finally returned from his business trip to Austin, I was eager to introduce him to Vanessa. We met at her office on a Thursday evening to go over the timeline and vendor contracts. "Marcus, this is Vanessa Morgan," I said as we walked into her office. "Vanessa, my fiancé." The handshake between them lasted a beat too long. Marcus smiled. That same charming smile that had won me over 3 years ago, and Vanessa's professional demeanor seemed to brighten considerably. "It's wonderful to finally meet you," she said. "Chelsea has told me so much about you." "All good things, I hope," Marcus replied with a laugh. "Only the best." During that meeting, I noticed Vanessa directing most of her questions to Marcus. She asked about his preferences for the ceremony, his thoughts on the reception timeline, even his opinion on the centerpieces. At first, I was pleased that she was being inclusive. Many wedding planners focus solely on the bride, treating the groom like an afterthought. But as the conversation continued, I realized she was barely looking at me. "Marcus, what do you think about having the ceremony at sunset?" she asked, leaning forward slightly. "The lighting would be absolutely magical." "That sounds perfect," he said. "What do you think, Chels?" I agreed, but noticed that Vanessa had already started writing down the time before I responded. Over the next few weeks, Vanessa began reaching out to Marcus directly. She'd text him about vendor confirmations, call him with questions about the bachelor party timeline, and even invited him to a cake tasting when I was out of town for work. "She's just being thorough," Marcus assured me when I mentioned it. "She wants to make sure both of us are happy with everything." But something felt off. Wedding planners typically work primarily with the bride, especially for aesthetic decisions. Yet Vanessa seemed increasingly interested in Marcus's opinions on everything from the font choice for our invitations to the style of the ceremony arch. The breaking point came during a venue walkthrough in early May. We were supposed to meet Vanessa at the Rosewood at 2 p.m. to finalize the layout and discuss logistics with the venue coordinator. I arrived a few minutes early and was surprised to see Vanessa's car already in the parking lot. I walked toward the garden area where we'd planned to have the ceremony and heard voices. Through the hedges, I could see Vanessa and Marcus standing near the gazebo where we'd planned to exchange vows. They were standing close together, closer than seemed necessary for a professional discussion. "The roses will be in full bloom by then," Vanessa was saying. "It'll be perfect." "You really think of everything," Marcus replied, and there was something in his tone that made my stomach tighten. I was about to call out to them when I heard Vanessa say, "I've been planning this for longer than you know." They turned when they heard my footsteps on the gravel path. Both looked startled, like they'd been caught doing something they shouldn't. "Chelsea," Vanessa recovered first. "You're early." "Just a few minutes," I said, looking between them. "What were you two discussing?" "Just going over the ceremony positioning," Marcus said quickly. "Making sure the photographer will have good angles." But the photographer had already been to the venue. We'd done a site visit with him the week before, and he'd mapped out all his shots. Why would they need to discuss angles without me? That night, I couldn't shake the feeling that something was wrong. Marcus was quieter than usual during dinner, and when I brought up the wedding, he seemed distracted. When I asked if he was having second thoughts, he assured me he was just stressed about work. But over the next few days, I started noticing other things. Marcus would step outside to take phone calls, claiming they were work-related. He'd become protective of his phone, taking it with him to the bathroom, and keeping it face down during dinner. When I asked about the bachelor party plans, he was vague about the details. "Vanessa's handling most of it," he said. "She knows a great party planner." Since when do wedding planners organize bachelor parties? "She's just being helpful. She has connections." I decided to do some investigating. I called Vanessa's office to ask about the bachelor party arrangements, but her assistant said she wasn't aware of any bachelor party planning services. "We focus exclusively on weddings and related events," she explained. "But I can ask Vanessa to call you back." When Vanessa called me back an hour later, she sounded flustered. "Oh, the bachelor party thing," she said. "I just made some recommendations. I'm not actually planning it." That's not what Marcus said. There was a pause. "Well, maybe I offered to help coordinate a few things. I want everything to go smoothly for your wedding weekend." But her explanation didn't make sense. If she was just making recommendations, why would Marcus say she was handling most of it? And why hadn't she mentioned any bachelor party involvement during our previous meetings? I started paying closer attention to Vanessa's behavior during our appointments. She lit up when Marcus arrived, but her enthusiasm seemed forced when it was just the two of us. She'd ask detailed questions about his schedule, his preferences, even his childhood memories for potential incorporation into the ceremony. "Marcus mentioned he grew up near a lake," she said during one meeting. "Maybe we could incorporate some water elements into the decor?" I frowned. "He grew up in suburban Fort Worth. There's no lake." "Oh," she looked confused. "Maybe I'm thinking of someone else." A lot of love and effort went into bringing this story to life. If you're enjoying it, we'd be so grateful if you'd subscribe to our channel. Now, back to where we left off. But who else would she be thinking of? And why would she lie about something so specific? The final straw came when I decided to surprise Marcus at his office with lunch. His assistant said he was in a meeting but would be free in an hour. I decided to wait in the lobby, scrolling through my phone and finalizing some last-minute wedding details. That's when I saw Vanessa walk into the building. She was carrying a small gift bag and seemed to know exactly where she was going. She didn't stop at the reception desk or look around like a visitor would. She walked straight to the elevators like she'd been there many times before. I followed her, staying far enough behind to avoid being seen. She got off on Marcus's floor and walked directly to his office. Through the glass walls, I watched her knock on his door. When he opened it, his face lit up in a way that made my heart sink. He hugged her. Not a professional handshake or a polite embrace, but a real hug that lasted several seconds. Then he ushered her into his office and closed the door. I stood in the hallway for 20 minutes watching them through the glass. They were sitting close together, examining something on his computer screen. At one point, she touched his arm while laughing at something he said. He didn't pull away. When I finally worked up the courage to knock on his door, they both looked guilty. Vanessa quickly moved to the other side of the desk, and Marcus minimized whatever they'd been looking at on his computer. "Chelsea," he said, standing up quickly. "I wasn't expecting you. I brought lunch," I said, holding up the takeout bag. "But I see you're busy." "We were just going over some vendor contracts," Vanessa said, gathering her things. "I should go." She squeezed past me in the doorway, and I caught a whiff of her perfume. It was the same scent I'd been smelling on Marcus's shirts lately, a fragrance I'd assumed was from a new fabric softener. After she left, Marcus and I sat in his office eating sandwiches in uncomfortable silence. Finally, I couldn't take it anymore. "How long has this been going on?" "What do you mean?" "You and Vanessa. Don't pretend you don't know what I'm talking about." Marcus set down his sandwich and looked at me with those blue eyes that had once made me weak in the knees. Now they just made me angry. "Chelsea, I think you're imagining things." "Am I?" "Because it seems like our wedding planner is more interested in planning something with you than with me. She's just thorough. She wants to make sure we're both happy." "Then why did she lie about you growing up near a lake? Why is she organizing your bachelor party when her office doesn't even offer that service? And why does she have your work address memorized?" Marcus was quiet for a long moment. Then he said, "Maybe we should postpone the wedding." The words hit me like a physical blow. "Postpone it? Marcus, we've already put deposits down on everything. The invitations went out last week. I just think we might be rushing into this." "Rushing? We've been together for 3 years. We've been engaged for 8 months. How is that rushing?" But even as I said it, I knew the real reason he wanted to postpone. It wasn't about timing or cold feet or wedding stress. It was about Vanessa. I left his office that day knowing my engagement was over, even if neither of us had said it out loud yet. But I also knew I needed to find out exactly what had been going on between my fiancé and my wedding planner. Because if I was going to lose everything I'd planned for, I at least deserved to know the truth. I spent the weekend in my apartment, alternating between crying and plotting. Marcus texted me twice, but I ignored both messages. I needed space to think, and more importantly, I needed to figure out what Vanessa and Marcus were really up to. Monday morning, I called in sick to work and drove to Vanessa's office building. I parked across the street with a clear view of the entrance and waited. At 9:47 a.m., she emerged with another woman I didn't recognize. They walked to a coffee shop 2 blocks away, and I followed at a distance. The coffee shop was busy enough that I could sit at a corner table without being noticed. Vanessa and her companion chose a booth near the window, and I strained to hear their conversation over the espresso machine noise. "Everything's falling into place perfectly," Vanessa was saying. "The venue confirmed the date change, and the florist can accommodate the switch." "What about the original client?" the other woman asked. "She's becoming suspicious, but it won't matter soon. Marcus is handling his end." My blood ran cold. Date change? Switch? What were they talking about? "Are you sure about this, Vanessa? It seems incredibly risky." "Trust me, Rebecca. I've been planning this longer than anyone realizes. By the time Chelsea figures out what's happening, it'll be too late to stop anything." I fumbled for my phone, desperate to record the conversation, but they were already standing up to leave. As they walked past my table, I heard Rebecca say, "Just make sure Marcus doesn't get cold feet. Men can be unpredictable when they're caught between two women. Vanessa laughed. Marcus won't be a problem. He's more invested in this than Chelsea ever was. After they left, I sat in that coffee shop for another hour, trying to process what I'd heard. Vanessa was planning something that involved Marcus, a date change, and switching something with a vendor. But what exactly was she switching? I decided to start with the vendors. That afternoon, I called the florist we'd hired for the wedding. "Hi, this is Chelsea Winters," I said. "I wanted to confirm the delivery details for our wedding on June 18th. "Oh, Ms. Winters." The florist sounded confused. "I thought we moved your delivery to June 25th. Ms. Morgan called last week to change the date." June 25th. That was exactly 1 week after our original wedding date. "Right, of course," I said, trying to keep my voice steady. "Can you remind me what arrangements we're doing for the June 25th event?" "The same package as discussed. Bridal bouquet with white peonies and dusty rose accents, 7 bridesmaids bouquets, boutonnieres for the groomsmen, and the ceremony arch arrangements. Plus the centerpieces for the reception." "And the bride's name on the order?" There was a pause. "I have it listed as V. Morgan. Is that correct?" "Versus Morgan. Vanessa Morgan." "Actually, there might be some confusion with the paperwork," I said. "Can you tell me the groom's name?" "Marcus Sullivan." I hung up and immediately called the venue. "Rosewood Mansion, this is Jennifer speaking." "Hi, this is Chelsea Winters. I need to confirm some details about our wedding reception on June 18th. Ms. in Winter, I show that the event was canceled. We have a Marcus Sullivan wedding scheduled for June 25th. Are you calling about that event?" "Canceled? When was it canceled? Let me check." "It looks like the cancellation came through last Tuesday from your wedding planner, Vanessa Morgan. She mentioned there was a family emergency that required postponing. And the June 25th event, who's the bride for that one?" "Vanessa Morgan." The room started spinning. I gripped the phone tighter. "Vanessa Morgan is marrying Marcus Sullivan on June 25th? "Yes, that's correct. Is there a problem?" I managed to end the call without completely falling apart, but barely. Vanessa wasn't just having an affair with my fiancé. She was literally stealing my entire wedding. Same groom, same venue, same vendors, just a different bride and a different date. I called the caterer, the photographer, the band, and the cake decorator. Every single one had received calls from Vanessa Morgan, acting as the wedding planner, changing the bride's name from Chelsea Winters to Vanessa Morgan, and moving the date from June 18th to June 25th. She had systematically hijacked every aspect of my wedding while pretending to plan it for me. But the most devastating call was to the officiant. Reverend Thompson had performed my parents' wedding 25 years ago, and I'd specifically requested him for our ceremony. "Chelsea, dear," he said when I called. "I was so sorry to hear about the family emergency. Vanessa explained that you needed to cancel, but I'm glad everything worked out for Marcus to still have his special day." "What exactly did she tell you?" "That there was a death in your family and you needed to postpone indefinitely. But Marcus's family had already made travel arrangements, so they decided to proceed with a smaller ceremony." She seemed very caring about the whole situation. "And you're still performing the ceremony?" "Well, yes. Marcus specifically requested that I still officiate. He said it would mean a lot to have continuity, especially during such a difficult time for you." I wanted to scream. Instead, I thanked Reverend Thompson and promised to explain everything later. That evening, I drove to Marcus's apartment. I had my own key, but I knocked instead, wanting to see his reaction when he saw me. He opened the door looking genuinely surprised. "Chelsea, I wasn't expecting you." "Clearly." I pushed past him into the living room and immediately noticed things that hadn't been there before. A woman's jacket draped over the back of his couch. A coffee mug with lipstick stains on the kitchen counter. A pair of high heels by the front door that definitely weren't mine. "We need to talk," I said. Marcus closed the door and leaned against it. "Look, I know I've been distant lately, but June 25th. The color drained from his face. "What?" "June 25th, Marcus. The Rosewood Mansion. Vanessa Morgan marrying Marcus Sullivan. Ring any bells?" He sat down heavily on the couch, putting his head in his hands. "How did you find out?" Does it matter? The question is, how long has this been going on? Marcus looked up at me, and for the first time since I'd known him, he looked genuinely ashamed. It wasn't supposed to happen like this. Then how was it supposed to happen? Were you planning to leave me at the altar? Or just disappear one day and let me figure it out? We never meant to hurt you. We? I laughed bitterly. So you're admitting there's a we? Marcus stood up and walked to the window, looking out at the parking lot. Vanessa and we connected in a way I didn't expect. When she started planning our wedding, we spent so much time together, talking about what we wanted for the future, our dreams, our goals. She understood me in a way that felt what, Marcus? More real than what we had? Different, he said quietly. She made me realize that maybe I was settling. The word settling hit me like a physical blow. 3 years together, and he thought he was settling for me. So instead of being honest and breaking up with me like an adult, you decided to steal my wedding. It wasn't like that. At first, we were just going to call off our wedding and maybe try dating after some time had passed. But then Vanessa pointed out that we'd already put down all these deposits, made all these arrangements. Her business was struggling and she couldn't afford to plan her own wedding from scratch. It seemed like a practical solution. Practical? My voice was getting louder. You call stealing my wedding practical? We were going to tell you. We just needed to figure out the right way. When? After you were already married? Marcus didn't answer, which was answer enough. I looked around the apartment that I'd helped him decorate, at the photos of us that were now conspicuously absent from the coffee table, at the life we'd built together that he'd apparently been ready to throw away for months. I have one question, I said. Did any of it mean anything to you? The 3 years, the proposal, the plans we made? Of course it did. Chelsea, you're an amazing person. You deserve someone who loves you completely, not someone who's always wondering if there's something better out there. And you think Vanessa is something better? I think she's what I've been looking for without knowing it. I wanted to argue, to fight for us, to remind him of all the good times we'd had together. But looking at him now, I realized he'd already made his choice. He'd made it weeks, maybe months ago. I was just the last person to know. Paya. I want my ring back, I said. Marcus nodded and disappeared into the bedroom. He returned with the engagement ring I'd worn for 8 months, the ring he'd carried in his backpack for 2 months before proposing, the ring that was supposed to symbolize our forever. I took it without ceremony and dropped it into my purse. I also want my deposit money back for all the vendors, I said. Since you're apparently getting married anyway, you can pay for your own wedding. Chelsea, that's not fair. You're not using any of those services anymore, because your girlfriend stole them from me. I'm out thousands of dollars because of your little scheme. We can work something out. No, I interrupted. We can't work anything out. You lost the right to negotiate with me when you decided to betray me. I headed toward the door, then turned back. One more thing. How long? What do you mean? How long have you been sleeping with her? Marcus was quiet for a long moment. 2 months, 2 months, which meant it started right around the time Vanessa took on our wedding planning. She hadn't just stolen my vendors and my venue. She'd been planning to steal my groom from the very beginning. I left Marcus's apartment that night knowing I had a choice to make. I could quietly disappear, let them have their stolen wedding, and try to move on with my life. Or I could make sure they faced some consequences for what they'd done to me. By the time I got home, I'd already decided which path I was taking. I spent Tuesday morning researching Texas wedding vendor laws and breach of contract regulations. What Vanessa had done wasn't just morally wrong, it was potentially illegal. She'd misrepresented herself to vendors, canceled contracts without authorization, and essentially committed fraud by using my deposits for her own wedding. But legal action would take months, and their wedding was scheduled for this Saturday. I needed a faster solution. That's when I remembered something from our very first meeting. Vanessa had mentioned that her business was struggling financially. She'd taken on our wedding planning partly because she needed the income. If I could prove to her vendors that she'd been operating fraudulently, they might be willing to cancel her contracts and work with me instead. I started with the photographer David Chen, who I'd personally connected with during our consultation. I called his studio and asked if we could meet that afternoon. Chelsea, I'm so sorry about your family emergency, he said when I arrived. Vanessa explained the situation. It must be incredibly difficult. David, I need to tell you something, and I need you to hear me out completely before you react. I laid out everything. The affair, the stolen wedding details, the vendor switches, Marcus's confession. I showed him the original contracts with my name, the receipts for deposits I'd paid, and even played a recording I'd made of Marcus admitting to the relationship. David's expression shifted from confusion to disbelief to anger as I explained. She told me you were too grief-stricken to continue with the wedding planning, he said. She made it sound like Marcus was barely holding it together and just wanted a small ceremony to honor the commitments already made. There was no family emergency. The only emergency is that my wedding planner fell in love with my groom and decided to steal my entire wedding. David shook his head. This is unbelievable. I've been in this business for 15 years, and I've never heard of anything like this. Will you help me? What do you have in mind? I want to take back my wedding. The real question is whether you're willing to work with me on Saturday instead of them. David didn't hesitate. Absolutely. This is fraud, plain and simple. I'll document everything for legal purposes, too. The florist, Maria Santos, was equally appalled when I explained the situation. She immediately pulled up the original order forms and compared them to the recent changes. I should have realized something was wrong when she changed the bride's name, Maria said. But she had all the details right. The color scheme, the flower types, even the specific arrangement styles you'd chosen. I assumed maybe you'd gotten married previously and were using a different name, or there was some family situation I didn't understand. She had all those details because she was supposedly planning the wedding for me. This is terrible. Of course I'll work with you instead. In fact, I'm going to make sure your arrangements are even more beautiful than what she ordered. The caterer, James Morrison, was harder to convince. His company had a strict policy about last-minute changes, and he was concerned about the legal implications of switching clients so close to the event date. I understand your situation, he said, but I need to protect my business too. What if this woman sues me for breach of contract? James, look at these original contracts. Look at who made the initial deposits. I have documentation proving that she misrepresented herself to you. You're not breaching a contract. You're fulfilling the original one with the actual client. After reviewing all my paperwork and consulting with his lawyer, James agreed to work with me instead of Vanessa. By Thursday evening, I had successfully reclaimed most of my vendors. The venue was trickier because they required a formal legal notice, but my lawyer cousin helped me draft a cease and desist letter that got their attention. But I wasn't done yet. I wanted Vanessa and Marcus to face the consequences of their actions publicly, not just logistically. Friday morning, I drove to Vanessa's office for what I knew would be our final conversation. Her assistant tried to tell me she was in a meeting, but I walked past the desk and opened her office door without knocking. Vanessa was on the phone, presumably with a vendor. When she saw me, her face went pale. "I'll call you back," she said, hanging up quickly. "Hello, Vanessa. Busy day planning your wedding?" She straightened in her chair, trying to regain her composure. "Chelsea, I can explain." "Actually, you can't. There's no explanation that makes what you've done acceptable. It's complicated." "No, it's really not. You stole my wedding. You lied to vendors, canceled my contracts, and manipulated my fiancé. None of that is complicated. It's just criminal." Vanessa stood up, moving around her desk. "You don't understand what Marcus and I have together. What you two had, it wasn't real love." "Real love?" I laughed. "You mean the kind of real love that starts with lying and cheating? We tried to fight our feelings, but some connections are just too strong to ignore. Did you try to fight your feelings before or after you started planning to steal my wedding?" Vanessa's confident facade cracked slightly. "We never meant for it to happen this way. But it did happen this way. And now you need to face the consequences." I pulled out a folder and placed it on her desk. "These are copies of all the vendor contracts you fraudulently altered. I've already contacted each vendor and provided them with documentation proving that you misrepresented yourself." Vanessa opened the folder, her hand shaking slightly as she flipped through the pages. "Most of them have agreed to honor their original contracts with me instead of you. The photographer, the florist, the caterer, even the venue. Your wedding tomorrow? It's not happening." "You can't do this," Vanessa said, her voice rising. "We've already invited guests. Marcus's family flew in from Seattle. Then I guess you should have thought about that before you decided to steal someone else's wedding. This is vindictive and cruel. No, Vanessa. Vindictive and cruel is what you did to me. This is just justice. I turned to leave, then paused at the door. Oh, and one more thing. I've also reported your business practices to the Better Business Bureau and the Texas Wedding Professionals Association. You might want to start looking for a new career. Saturday morning arrived with perfect June weather, sunny and warm with a gentle breeze. Exactly the kind of day I'd always dreamed of for my wedding. Of course, I wasn't getting married that day. But I wasn't going to let all the planning and deposits go to waste either. Instead of a wedding, I threw myself a freedom party. I invited all the guests who had been planning to attend my wedding, explained the situation in a group text, and asked them to join me for a celebration of new beginnings instead. The response was overwhelming. Friends and family members were outraged on my behalf and eager to support me. My maid of honor, Jessica, organized a group of friends to help set up. My mom brought my grandmother's pearl necklace that I was supposed to wear as my something old. Even my dad, who rarely shows emotion, hugged me tight and told me he was proud of how I'd handled everything. The party was held at the Rosewood Mansion, in the same garden where I was supposed to exchange vows with Marcus. Instead of wedding vows, I gave a toast about the importance of surrounding yourself with people who truly value and respect you. This isn't the celebration I planned 6 months ago, I told the crowd of friends and family. But it might be exactly the celebration I needed. The photographer David documented everything. The florist Maria had created even more beautiful arrangements than originally planned. The caterer served an incredible dinner, and the band played until late into the evening. Around 10 p.m., as the party was winding down, I noticed a familiar car pull into the parking lot. Marcus got out, dressed in a wrinkled shirt and jeans, looking like he hadn't slept in days. He approached me hesitantly. "Chelsea, can we talk?" "What's there to talk about, Marcus?" "I made a mistake. A huge mistake. Vanessa, she's not who I thought she was." I looked at him, really looked at him, and felt nothing. No anger, no sadness, no longing for what we'd lost. Just a mild curiosity about what had finally opened his eyes. "What happened?" "When all the vendors canceled on us yesterday, she completely fell apart. Started screaming at me, blaming me for not handling you better, saying I'd ruined everything. She showed a side of herself I'd never seen before." "And that surprised you? You saw how easily she lied and manipulated people. Did you think she'd treat you differently?" Marcus ran his hands through his hair. "I realize now that what we had was built on deception. You can't build a real relationship on lies." "No, you can't. I want to make this right, Chelsea. I want us to try again." I looked around at all the people who had shown up to support me, friends who had dropped everything to help me reclaim my wedding vendors, family members who had rallied around me when I needed them most, colleagues who had offered legal advice and emotional support. "Marcus, I've spent the last week discovering what real love and loyalty look like. It looks like people who show up for you when things get difficult, not people who abandon you when someone more exciting comes along. I know I don't deserve another chance, but you're right, you don't." He stood there for a moment, probably hoping I'd change my mind. When I didn't say anything else, he finally nodded and walked back to his car. Jessica appeared at my side as we watched him drive away. "Any regrets?" she asked. "Just one," I said. "I regret not seeing who he really was sooner, but I'm grateful I found out before we actually got married." "So what happens now?" I looked around at the party still going on around us. People laughing, dancing, celebrating new possibilities instead of mourning lost dreams. Now I focus on building a life with people who actually deserve to be in it. The following Monday, I received a call from my lawyer cousin with an update. Vanessa's business license had been suspended pending investigation, and several other former clients had come forward with complaints about her business practices. Marcus had apparently tried to get his job back after Vanessa's business collapsed, but his company had already filled his position. I also learned that they'd tried to have a small ceremony at a courthouse on Saturday afternoon, but even that fell through when the officiant they'd hired discovered the situation and refused to perform the service. 6 months later, I was having coffee with Jessica when she mentioned seeing Marcus at a grocery store. He was working as a sales associate at an electronics store, apparently still trying to rebuild his career and his life. "Did you feel anything when you heard that?" Jessica asked. Relief, I said honestly. Relief that I'm not tied to someone who makes such spectacularly bad decisions. I never saw or heard from Vanessa again. I heard through mutual acquaintances that she'd moved to Austin and was working in corporate event planning, having been effectively blacklisted from the wedding industry. As for me, I kept the engagement ring, not because I still had feelings for Marcus, but because I'd learned something valuable from the whole experience. I had it reset into a pendant, a reminder that I survived betrayal and came out stronger. A year later, I met David at a coffee shop downtown. Not David the photographer, but David the architect, who was in line behind me when I spilled my latte all over the counter. He helped me clean up the mess, bought me a replacement coffee, and made me laugh about my clumsiness instead of feeling embarrassed. When he asked me out the following week, I said yes. When he introduced me to his friends a month later, I wasn't worried about whether he really wanted to be there. When he met my family during the holidays, I didn't wonder if he was comparing me to other options, because I'd learned the difference between someone who chooses you and someone who settles for you until something better comes along. And 18 months after my stolen wedding, when David proposed to me during a hiking trip in Colorado, coincidentally, not far from where Marcus had proposed years earlier, I said yes, without any hesitation. Because this time, I knew I was with someone who saw me as the prize, not the consolation. The wedding planning process was completely different the second time around. I worked with vendors who had proven their integrity, chose a venue that felt meaningful to both of us, and surrounded myself with people who had demonstrated their loyalty when it mattered most. And when I walked down the aisle 9 months later, I knew with absolute certainty that the man waiting for me at the altar was there because he genuinely wanted to be, not because he'd been manipulated or pressured or was settling for what seemed convenient. Sometimes the worst thing that happens to you turns out to be the best thing that could have happened. Because if Vanessa hadn't stolen my first wedding, I never would have discovered how strong I was on my own. And I never would have found someone who loves me enough to choose me every single day, not just when it's easy or convenient. That's a love worth waiting for. Looking for more? We've got 2 amazing stories ready for you right on screen. If this one touched you, these are absolutely worth your time. Click to watch them now. And hey, subscribe and hit that bell to never miss our latest uploads.